For anyone who just got here, the first step is to install Android Studio because that's the IDE that we're going to be using today. And then here is the GitHub link to the demo. You could also just not do it and just listen. It's honestly your choice. Like, yeah. Are you going to be sharing the slide? Yeah, I already shared it with the CS Club people. You could. It's like basically if you just look in the Discord, and you would be able to find the link. It's gonna stay shared in public, so I'm not gonna change any of the sharing permissions. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let me know when you guys are done. Yeah.
Hey, hi. You need to get portfolio. Yeah. Still it's amazing, like, and you also made a food and yeah. Right, good. You think that?
You can go back every weekend.
Tutorials. Yeah.
Go back.
Maybe ask
Yeah, I asked them to let me know if they were done, and yeah. Honestly, maybe I should have told everyone to do it before. Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Oops. Okay. Okay, how's the progress with downloading Android Studio? Good? Is everyone done? Oh no. Oh, okay. Only a bit for you. Maybe we can move on and like you guys can like catch up. That's fine. Yeah, because it might take time. Okay, well, I'm gonna be recording this And so if you want to follow along later on your own time, feel free to look at it. Yeah. Okay.
Just ask a question. How many have installed the under power plan?
Okay. Raise your hand if you installed it. Okay.
It's fine. You don't have to install it all in one.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Okay, hopefully you've cloned the demo, and if you did install Android Studio, please set up your emulator. I can actually show it to you right now. I also have like a tutorial with the photos on the presentation. And so basically, I already have my emulator set up, but usually, if only my Zoom thing would go away. Okay. If you go to Device Manager here, so you see this drop down. I don't know how to, I can zoom in. I don't know how. And then if you go to create device, you basically can make a device, a virtual emulator. And so I usually go with the Pixel 5. No reason. It's because the person who like helped me learn Android development uses Pixel 5. So I was like, sounds good. I'll do it too. Yeah. And then next. And so now you have to choose a system image. I usually go with R because it's sort of like the middle of the pack in terms of how new it is. And so depending on which system image you use, it may or may not be able to be like run on like certain like Android phones. And so this covers pretty much half. So I was like, good enough. And yeah, you could probably go with whichever one you want. I just went with R, mainly because I was like, yeah, seems legit. And here you can just like name your emulator if you want. And you can leave all of the settings basically default because they don't really like matter in terms of this demo. But if you want, you can always go and like edit them on your own time if you want something different. And then you click finish. I'm not going to do it in this case, mainly because I already have an emulator. But if you click finish, it should be able to, you know, oh yeah, you have to install. There's like this installation icon on, let me show you the screen. So here, you know how there's like this installation icon? You have to click this in order to install the system image, and then you click next. That's how you select it. Yeah. Let me know if you have any like questions or if you want me to like go and look over, or one of these two to go and look over. Or you can also look at the photos in the slide. Yeah, feel free to like ask, because otherwise I'm just gonna be standing here and doing nothing. So, oh yeah, and I use Slide Carnival, so there's a bunch of useless slides on there that I didn't use. And that's the reason why it looks like it's 50 slides long when it's actually like 10. Yeah?
Is this demo actually for any motion?
I have no clue. I would recommend going with R because I didn't test it. I only tested it with this one. So yeah, technically you're supposed to test it on a lot of like different devices. But you see this, yeah, I had some limited time this week. So yeah.
Is everybody use Android so we download it? But I used to.
Were you able to get it?
Okay, download it.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, you look from your. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, do you have a specific folder or layer where you want it? No. But should I? Okay, we can go with that. Yeah. And then take it down. Yeah, remember this? Yeah, and I think we might did uppercase.
Oh.
Okay, awesome. And then now we do git clone, which is the if you go back to the slide in the bottom, there's like basically a command. Do you have the copy and paste it? Or no, like on a good git. Like the whole
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's not good. You know what, everyone on my side. Yeah.
It might take a while. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, let me know when you're all done with setting up the emulator.
I hope you all have access to the slides.
Okay, cool. So, I guess we could go back to, yeah, so if you have any like questions, feel free to ask. We will also, there's a slide so you can reference it for emulator setup. And so let's talk about some important tidbits about Android development. So in order to access the internet and perform network operations, there's this thing in your Android project that you need to be aware of. So if you open up the demo and if you look at this folder and the file, so there's this thing called an Android manifest, and this is basically like settings. You can change whichever activity, which is what we call sort of like a page in an Android app. You can change whichever one gets loaded up on launch through the manifest. And so one important thing that you also want to do is, oh yeah, this is how you do it. Is you basically, if you wanted to change which launcher and you had a different activity, you would basically move this part into that activity. And so I didn't do that because I don't have another activity. So I'm just using the auto-generated main activity that always gets generated when you create a new Android project in Android Studio. So what you need to do every time you want to use a network operation in your app is you need to include these two lines, these two. And so basically what this does is it gives your app permission to use the internet, and that's it. But you might, I don't know, if you don't include it, you won't be able to access the internet. And yeah, sometimes people forget and then they are like, why is my app not working? And it's because of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Do these lines come by default?
No, they don't. You have to include it. I'm not sure if there's a plugin that makes it come by default, but whenever I've done coding and worked on an Android app, I've always had to edit it whenever I made a new one. But definitely go and see if there's a plugin that does include it automatically in the manifest. So yeah. And then so another tidbit is print statements. And so when you're debugging in while doing Android development, you want to use Logcat because that's like the built-in like, print system that there is in Android Studio. And it's just basically a little better for annotation, mainly because like you can actually like indicate which if it's like an error, it's supposed to be like an error statement or something like that. And so basically, I actually didn't include any logcat statements in my code for the demo. Yeah, I forgot to do that. Well, usually it should look, I forgot, it's log dot, yeah, it's log dot, so this would be for whatever error message you want, and then fill in the parameters. And so this is just one example of how to use logcat. And this is the usual, I think. I don't know. It's been a hot second since I've done Android development. So yeah. And then another important thing is related to multi-threading. And so you don't have to have taken any multi-threading courses to like really understand this. Basically, the main idea in Android development is the main thread is used to process UI. So like animations, changing frames, etc. All of that is processed using the main thread. And so in order for you to access your backend, I recommend using background threads or like creating new threads to do that. Because if you, so an issue you might run into if you use the main thread to also, in addition to processing your UI, you also use it to like access a database, and then you're retrieving information from that database, you might end up skipping frames in your app. And so this causes, like, for example, if you have an animation in your app, like those really fancy loading screens, it's gonna not animate basically because the frames are getting skipped. And so that's like, not great. And yeah, so that's why you want to use more than one thread in Android development. And then, so this last tidbit here is basically talking about what type of design Android development usually is built on, and that's the MVC design model, which is model, view, controller. And what that means is you have a model, which is usually like a class. And so you know how like a usual Java object looks like this? This is like a super simplified version. This is basically a model. It's like, an object. And then for view, usually it's referring to like AI. Or sorry, not AI, UI. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. In this case, it's stuff like this, which is the XML files, which you use in order to create the UI of the Android app. And so we'll talk more about the XML files later, but first let's go back to the tidbit. And then the controller, it's like the code you use in order to like change things in your view when you get new information when your model is being updated. The model works closer to backend. Controller is like the thing in the middle, and then you have the front end, which is your view. Yeah. Any questions? Cool. And then definitely another important tidbit is about testing. So you do want to make unit tests to test your code, like especially if you want to like go into industry. That's a super important part and really differentiates you from like other interns or like other like full-time engineers is testing. You want to make unit tests, and so the difference between if you go back to the code and you look here, you know how there's like two folders. So these are auto-generated. One is for Android tests and one is for unit tests, basically. And so Android tests involves tests that use Android frameworks. And then source like regular tests are basically just regular unit tests that you don't really need like Android frameworks to run on your emulator. And so that's just like a difference. Not like, I guess you could stick them all into one like directory, but like it's just a little more organized if you don't. And then you should definitely test different devices because there's like a super broad range of like Android devices on the market. If you don't like test on most of them, like some of your app might look or like kind of different on certain devices. And so like an anecdote would be like retrieving photos from a like Android device might be different. Like you might get it at different like if you try to rotate it, it might look different compared to another device. And so that's something I found that was a big pain in the yeah. Yeah. Does anyone need help? Do I need to like pause? Really? Thanks for coming. Do you want a burrito? Okay. Yeah.
So I'll do like download it, like make sure it doesn't.
If you could, yeah.
Okay, bye.
Yeah. Let me just say, so can you open that? You go to your then terminal, second terminal command prompt, PowerShell or and then which folder do you want like
I was download it.
Yeah, you know, like I was graduating next year. I'm gonna do that. We'll do my thing.
and then go here. Yeah, so right now, yours, like, can you just
Yeah.
or like go over here? Are you on? And then
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing yeah. You might adjust your costume.
Sure. If you go back,
So how often do you like that?
okay, that's okay. Go back to terminal, or sorry, command prompt.
Yeah, so questions are you on?
Into
Yeah.
your, let's just add it to
Yeah.
your downloads.
They put it on and
And then,
you
so basically what C does is you basically go into a directory and then if you go back
Yeah.
to the slide.
I feel like go to the
And basically
Yeah.
they are trying to download it.
I've done so much for it. Like, for
you're going to need to download
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, with your machine, you can check in with something. Okay. Yeah, no worries about dealing with it. It's definitely something that happens. Does anyone else need help? Okay. Wait, guys, sorry. Can you guys also help her? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's okay. So these are just like important, like, when you're creating your opinion for that. So, yeah, I made my quick demo and everything that I was thinking about. You can actually so this is like the over, like, let's say we have like each file is like a person, right? And then we have like here, the spot. And so Android manifests kind of like that leader, where it takes basically like it controls the very overarching. Yeah. And so one important thing you have to do is here. So this is, yeah. And so usually when you make a new Android, you have in Android Studio, it doesn't come with these, so you have to include these in order to like access the unit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So far we haven't made any changes to the program yet, right?
Well, I already wrote out all the code because I'm like not that great with coding on the spot, so I have to do it.
That makes sense.
But
No, yeah, I following along and they say it, I'm like, oh, because she's doing this and it could be very well. So I am like,
you have to like, be able to help. And yeah, so yeah.
yeah, I followed along for the other ones too. I just didn't know where to put it. So. Okay, so. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, if you want, you can also open your computer and then go.
I figured compared to the other because I had a bunch of things. Just turn on.
It was sadder earlier. Oh wait, is Android Studio downloadable?
Oh, it's not. I'll just pay attention. I'll be.
Yeah.
Wait, do you have it?
I know. Let's see. Oh, you're going. Still here.
Start it up. I'm trying to start it. Because that, yeah. Okay, can you help them? Yeah. Okay.
Just like this. See me?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So I'm gonna continue on, since we are a little limited on time. Let's talk about XML. So XML files are what you use in order to create your UI. And so here, let me give you some examples of what they look like. So if you go into your res folder, res stands for resources. It's this one right here. And if you open it up, you can see that there's a bunch of like, files. And so in layout, that's where you want to put your UI XML files. here. And so I already made XML files because I was like, working on this demo. And usually when you create a new Android application, it just shows that with like activity_main. So like this is the only file that is like auto-generated when you create a new Android app. And so what this looks like, and so, okay, so something special about Android Studio is that we have two views that you can use in order to create your UI. There's this view, which let me move my emulator for a second, which basically is XML. This is XML code. And so you are basically able to, code it as usual, like similar to other languages. But there's also the ability to, if you look here at design where my cursor is, you will see that you can also basically drag and drop. And so this is basically what XML looks like in the IDE. And let's go back and talk about what it exactly is. And so it basically is used to define the layout and properties of user interface elements. And so I got all of the explanations from ChatGPT because I was too lazy to actually come up with a good explanation. But yeah. And so Android applications use the XML files to basically make the UI. There, that's the summary. It's a really long thing that can be summarized into like a sentence. And so here's like, oh yeah, we have vegan, vegetarian, and bacon.
Honestly, I want to grab one right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and so thanks for coming. Yeah, let's continue. So there are XML layouts, and so here are like 5 most popular. I personally prefer constraint layout, mainly because it lets me like, it's kind of like, it just lets you make it very like constrained in your, like, let me show you what I mean. So here, so this is, so if you go back to my code, you would see that this is in using constraint layout and this is using frame layout, right? And so the reason why I'm doing this is I like to have constraint layout be like my kind of like a background in a sense, where basically it lets me like put specific items and it's like kind of like sticking it onto my UI. So for example, here you see this part of the IDE. It says constraint widget, and basically this lets me stick the start of my bottom navigation view to the very edge, to the start of my like device's screen, essentially. And so this just allows me for like very easy placement of whatever you want to add to your UI. And so, yeah, and then the reason why I used frame layout inside of here is because, well, this is kind of going into stuff I put later in the slide. And so frame layout I use there because I want to switch fragments. And let me actually go back to the slides so we can talk about that. So let's first actually talk about frame layouts and what they are. And it's basically just used to display a single view at a time. And it's typically used for fragments or full screen activities. And so let's talk about what the difference between activities and fragments are. So activities is like this component of an application that represents a single screen. And then an activity is a reusable UI component. And so depending on how like much you want to reuse UI components, you can choose between using an activity or a fragment. I think typically you want to use more fragments than activities, but they are, they do have like a relationship where activities are like the parent and the fragments like the children. And so fragments can communicate with each other, like other fragments, and then they also communicate with the activity, which is their parent. And yeah, that allows you to pass data and events back and forth. And that's how you change between different like views or different like UI components in your app. And I'm gonna talk more about that right now. And so here, you know how I have like this fragment frame, which is this frame layout that's sitting on top of my activity. So if you look at my main activity, so go into Java and then the workshop demo, and then you go into main activity, you'll be able to see what code I wrote. And so when you create a new Android app, the main activity always comes auto-generated. You can name it whatever you want. Usually you want to name it like whatever the thingy is, and then activity. That's kind of just like naming convention. And so here in my main activity, this method is always auto-generated. This is auto-generated, and this super is also auto-generated, and so is set content view. Basically what this does is it basically sets your UI onto your screen, and that's pretty much it. And so in this case, the thing I set is my activity, right? Activity main, which is this XML file here, if you can see on the screen. And then I also have on this line a fragment manager, and a fragment manager is what is going to allow me to change the fragments on my screen. And so in this case, I actually have a fragment transaction occurring right at the start of my activity code. And the reason why I put that there was because I wanted to, if you look back at main activity main.xml, you see this is like empty, right? And we don't want users to just like look at an empty screen. We want them to actually be able to see stuff. And so I actually made, why does it look like this? Oh, okay. So I made a fragment main XML file, which is also like auto-generated when you create a new fragment, usually. And so this is the thing that I want to be displayed on the main screen. And so what that would look like would be this. Where's my emulator? Here it is. Okay, so you see how here in my emulator, when I run my code, also the emulator can be quite slow when you start it at first. It's pretty slow on Windows. It's crazy slow, actually. And so, yeah, sorry for my tangent. Basically what I was saying is this is the fragment XML that got put onto the main activity XML because I used the fragment transaction whenever this runs, basically. And so basically, yeah, this is basically a code to put some fragment onto your activity. And then, so in order for, so there's something interesting about Android that's slightly, well, it's, I don't know. Basically, if you like want to access one of the items or views in your XML file, you have to do this method called find view by ID. It's a little self-explanatory, but basically, you get the ID of whichever like view you want by doing r.id. The name of that view. And so in this case, I want to get my bottom navigation view, which if you look back in activity main.xml, you can see that this is what the view I want to get. This is the view I want to get. And so that means, because this is like just initializing it, because at the very beginning of the activity, you see that I only have like, I haven't actually initialized it. And so the thing, in order to make it change, like, you know, pages, like what I just did, is for it to, you know, be selectable, right? You want it to click. You want things to click. And so in order to do that, I put a listener. So on items, you can read it. I'm not gonna say the command out loud. And this is basically just a way of making an item selectable. And here we have a method that allows me to switch whichever fragment I want, depending on, it's just a switch statement, basically. Switch statement, and then you make a new fragment, depending on the ID of like whatever you clicked on, the view, you basically set it to that. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It might take a while to get used to it, but if you look at the code and like continue reading it, you can definitely like see what's happening. Honestly, I'm not a fan of throwing this here because it's kind of janky. What if something works and the user just gets their app just crashes? It's not great practice, but this is a demo, so I'm kind of like whatever. Anyways, and in order to actually change the fragment, you call begin transaction dot replace whatever you want on your fragment manager, which is this thing up here. I'm gonna actually make my file directory a little smaller so you can see that clearer. And yeah, and then make sure, okay, so let me talk about the stuff I added here. Adding to the backstack, you see this button right here on your emulator. This is going back. So adding it to the backstack allows you to manually add some like fragment as part of the like whatever stack, like the backstack, basically. If you go back, it'll go back to that fragment. If you don't add it, sometimes it doesn't go back to that fragment. And so if you really want something to be like, to allow a user to go back on something, then you do want to add it to the backstack. You can name it however you want. I called it main fragment. So yeah. And then commit is very important because that actually commits the action. If you don't have the commit and you do everything else before it, nothing's gonna happen. So yeah. And then return true is just there. So it matches the overridden method. And yeah. And this, ignore this. This is just some UI preference. It's just to make the bottom navigation this color. Because usually its default is white. And if you make it white here, you can't see the actual bottom navigation bar. So yeah. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions. This is kind of silent. Like, is everyone doing good?
Are you guys following?
Yeah, so at the backstack, basically, you see how here there's like this back button. So this is a back button. So if I click, yeah, and so add to back, is it traced or backstack? Backstack, yeah. So how like you implement, you know how like in a browser, if you want to go to the page you just visited, you press the back button, right? And so how that's implemented is using a stack. Basically, you stack like whichever page you just went to, and it gets stacked. And so in order for a app to access the back page, while it does automatically keep track, if you want a specific fragment, to be added to the stack, you do add to back stack. Yeah. I hope that answered your question. Well, anyone else? Yes.
So there's an activity made XML file, right?
Yes.
And in the 24th line, that is set content view part of your activity made. Is the activity main referring to the same XML file?
Yes, exactly. Okay, thanks for coming. Feel free to grab a burrito. Okay, is everyone okay with continuing? Okay, awesome. So moving on, we are gonna now talk about adapters. So adapters are classes that I talked about. They're like the controllers. You know how I talked about MVC, like model view controller? Yeah, feel free to grab burritos now and then sit back down. I'll just continue talking while you do. And so in this case, we have page adapter. And so what page adapter does is, if you see over here, how I have like this like input box, if I do, and then I do girls to code, and I basically add a bunch of clubs. Can I get bacon, please? Awesome, thanks. And then, can I get the creamy orange one? Thank you, yes. And then, oh dear, why did it, okay. Okay. Why is this like this? I thought. Oh. Not bad. There's actually a bug. I forgot I changed something last night and I didn't fix this. Okay. If you actually go into your fragment page XML file, and then you go to the code, could you please change this line to parent? I forgot yeah, I was doing some stuff and I was a little cooked yesterday, so I didn't properly debug my code. And then let me rerun my emulator. Okay, it's taking a while. While I wait, let's go back to the presentation. And so adapters are responsible for fetching data from a data source. Because I didn't build a backend for this, we're not really fetching any data, which is why in the demo, I have like this input box where you can basically add whatever you want to the list and it'll add it to like this scrolling view. And so what this scrolling view thing is called in XML. Oh, okay. Well, let me show it here. So what you see how this thing that I'm like highlighting. So this is called a recycler view. And so a recycler view is one of the views you can use in order to make like a scrolling section in your app. And so a special thing about the recycler view is once you scroll past something, it kind of gets deleted in a sense, like it doesn't get saved. And so this lets you save on a lot of like memory. Yeah, or like not exactly memory, but it basically makes it more efficient. And I recommend using it like this. And so, for example, let me show you. I need to add it back in. Yeah, feel free to just eat while I do this. Okay, should have added a ton of them. Okay, so you see how I can scroll? Yeah, that's basically the point of the recycler view. So how do you implement this? So here, you know, UI is pretty simple. Like what you just stick it into the whichever like XML file you want. So for example, here, that's the recycler view. You drag it in and then you fix the constraint. This is exactly why I like constraint layout, is because I can literally just like stick all of the edges on here and I'm like done with all the formatting. It's not like a pain in the butt with like CSS and web dev where you have to like center a div, and that's crazy. And so yeah. And so in order to access an adapter, yeah, let's actually go into the fragments. And so basically here in the fragments, you also have to like initialize stuff. And so specifically here, in order to make the adapter, I had to initialize my actual adapter and then also the recycler view. And so in some important things you have to be aware of is after you initialize your adapter, you have to set the adapter. The recycler view has to set the adapter to the adapter you want. And if you don't, you're going to get an error saying you didn't link your recycler view to your adapter. I also recommend having a layout. And so a layout manager is basically similar to how back here, you know how we have like layouts? Like for example, the constraint layout, the frame layout. This thing here, what I'm doing here is basically dynamically setting it. So the difference between dynamically doing something versus like just having it like just be there statically is when I was making those XML files, those were like static components. But here, this is dynamic because I'm doing it because it's being made when the program runs, basically. And so that's basically the difference. This is already there. And then this is being made when the program runs during runtime versus this being already like being loaded in a sense. So yeah, and then this is basically how you set the layout manager onto your recycler view. This code right here is just to code like this section of my fragment. Basically, whenever I add a like club onto our list, I know I spelled competitive wrong. I'm sorry. And basically, in order to get like the user input, you want to first identify the XML view that you're trying to get it from. Not the XML view, just the view, the view's ID. And then you get the string or get the text string, and then you add it to the list of items that you are going to display in your adapter. And then you have to notify your adapter that there's been a thing inserted. In this case, I am inserting items to the end of the list, which is why I did clubs.size -1, because I'm adding it to the end of the list, and that's why I'm setting the position for my adapter to put it in at the end of the list. And yeah. Oh, something important that I need to talk about as well is here. So this is actually going back a little. And so this is actually how you go from a fragment to another fragment. And so this is pretty important. You basically initialize that new fragment that you want to go to, and then you access your parent. So a thing about fragment managers are created in the activity, which is the parent of the fragment. So in order for you to actually make any transactions, you want to, get your parent's fragment manager. Low key, it's kind of like helicopter parenting, where you have to get your parents' permission to do anything. And yeah. And then you do the same code from then on. So that's basically the only difference. And yeah, back to adapters. So there's this thing called context. I honestly should have put the definition in the slides, but it's searchable online, so I recommend searching it up. So if you go back to page fragment, you see how here we have this line that creates a new page adapter. So this is basically initializing this. So this is making a new object of this. And the reason why we want to pass in the context is because adapters don't have their own context. And so you have to give it to the adapter from the fragment or activity that you're calling or instantiating the adapter in. And so this is why we have these two variables. Honestly, this could be private, but whatever. And okay, let's talk about what this even means. And so since we're handling recycler views, there's obviously recycler views out and about in the world. And so you don't have to recreate your own recycler view. You can just inherit, extend, implement, extend from an already existing one, which is this. And so basically, if you create it, you instantiate it. These are all these three methods all come with the extended library. Basically whenever you add this to your first line of your code, it's just going to tell you to add these methods into your code. And so I didn't write these. Basically, I got it added, and then I edited the inside of the methods. And in this case, here, for example, I'm just returning the size of clubs. Here, I'm calling bind, which I'll talk about later. And then here, I am inflating the view. And so in this case, I'm inflating this. And so something about Android development is this. You see how in the emulator, I have each listed section of things. And so this section, this item here, is basically one of this XML file. It's called item_club. I call it item at the very beginning because it's sort of indicating that it's an item of the list, right? And so this is basically the UI of whatever item you want to add to your list. And so this allows, oh, bless you, no worries. And so this is why it looks very organized and the same. And so you don't have to honestly, you could dynamically also do it, programming it in your code, but I did it statically. I don't really think there's a difference, to be honest. You can do it however you want. Anyways, but I don't know. I think it's better to do it statically because you can very easily inflate it just like this. And so let's talk about bind. So bind is referring to this inner class here called view holder, which I'm extending from recycler views view holder as well as an on-click listener. So the reason why I actually put that on-click listener is for you guys to do whatever you want with like the code. And so you see how when I actually click things in the emulator, nothing happens, right? And that's because I have nothing in my on-click method. So if you want, you can like further develop this app and experiment with creating views of your own. For example, creating like a view where a pop-up shows up talking about each of these individual clubs. And so you could do that by in your on-click. You can do that in your on-click method, and you could, like, for example, create a new fragment in the file directory, and then also like make a fragment transaction. Do that or something like that. And so honestly, up to you. Yeah, back to bind. Sorry, kind of tangential. So here, this is just initiating stuff again. Like you see, I have like variables that I want to assign things to, specifically the IDs of whichever XML layout I want them to connect to. And bind is pretty important because it actually gets stuff onto the adapter, the recycler view. And so in this case, what I'm trying to bind is the logo, like the image logo, and then also the name. I'm sorry, this is really small. Let me make it bigger. Okay, this is better. Yeah. So what I want to do is like, yeah. So you see how here, like, so I put 2 clubs logo on there since it is like our clubs. Thought that would be nice. And then this basically gets us whatever this is like. Okay, so if you go back to the page fragment and you see this club's array list, and then you see this, you know how we're adding a new club name that is taken from the stuff we input? This basically goes into here, right? It goes into, there's some extra parameters that you don't have to deal with. I just kept it there. Where is it? Oh wait, this is the wrong file. It goes into here, right? So you have all the list of clubs of the user input, and it gets updated every time you input a new club, because in here you are notifying the adapter whenever a new club is inserted, right? And so this means you can just get a name from the club list. And so here, club, we're putting in club here because in the outer method on bind view holder, we get the club from the position that is passed in. And so the position is coming from, if you go back here, this is the position that's being passed in, I believe. And it basically just goes through the list and, puts like adds to the adapter one by one. And so I'm going to try and go a little faster now. I hope you guys get some of it at least. And so another thing about, I forgot to mention this. So very important, how do we handle dependencies in Android? So usually we use Gradle. Gradle is a dependency tool that you can use, and you can search out Gradle's definition. So I actually I added two dependency, these two. This one is used to basically add photos and images onto, like, you know, you see how like Club SJSU, Girls Who Code. This is using the Glide library, which I added. And so the really neat thing about Gradle is all you have to do if you want to use an outside library, instead of with like Eclipse where you have to like add it to your class path, you have to download the jar file and stuff like that. You can literally just put one line of code and then you get the entire library basically. And so that's implementation. Thank you for coming, by the way. And so if we go back to page adapter, you see I use the Glide library to load the image onto each of the like image views. And if you go back here, this is what I mean by image view. So this is an image view. It's basically a view that you use to hold an image. And I managed to make these image views be round because I used round with corners. Yeah, it's just a class that you could use. And then you load it into the view. And then you set the text. And that's pretty much it. Is there anything else? Let me look. Yeah, that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
I wonder, like, when you use that,
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any more questions? Yeah.
It's like basically similar to React,
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah, it's very similar to React. I would
Except that it's a JavaScript framework and
yeah, this is Java XML pages.
Yeah.